Steve. Yeah. Welcome, everybody. I'd like to call the Anaheim City Council meeting to order. First item on the agenda is a workshop on the user and development impact fees. Madam City Manager, could you please introduce the workshop?
Yes, good afternoon, Mayor and Council members. Finance Director Debbie Moreno, her team, and our executives here will lead the workshop on user and development impact fees. During this presentation, Council will receive a recommendation from staff. My ask of Council this afternoon is to please use this workshop to provide staff with direction if there are any concerns with our recommendation. This will allow us to address your concerns prior to the budget adoption in June. With that said, we have listened to each of you individually, and city departments have worked collaboratively to review the studies and present a thoughtful recommendation. And we believe our recommendations are fair and equitable, and most importantly, in line with other cities. As you know, the city contracted with MGT Consulting in 2016 and David Tosick and Associates so shortly thereafter to conduct a comprehensive review and analysis of our user fees and development impact fees. We have not reviewed these fees in over 10 plus years, and therefore the city's fees have generally remained static. The user fee study reviewed over 1,400 fees throughout the city, quantified the cost of services, and determined the current shortfall the city covers. The development fees study identified the capital needs of our departments based on long-term development and determined the maximum rates to recover the reasonable cost of providing improvements. This workshop and our recommendation is based on the results of the studies, as well as comparisons with other large cities, Orange County cities, and our need to ensure we remain financially sustainable while continue to do what we do best, which is providing the great service our community and businesses expect from us. The cost of providing services or funding improvements are outpacing our revenue increases, and these adjustments will simply allow us to continue to grow and provide greater services, thereby the ability to put money back into our neighborhoods, parks, and streets, and hopefully our growing workforce. With that, I will hand it over to Debbie Moreno, our Finance Director and Treasurer, to begin the presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and members of the City Council. Today's presentation covers two main topics, the Comprehensive User Fee Study and the Development Impact Fee Study. We'll conclude with next steps. Over the past year or so, the city undertook a comprehensive fee analysis to understand today's costs of providing services. Historically, fee studies have varied by department, and this current study allowed for an overall review of our fee schedules across the board. The study allowed the city to quantify the subsidized cost for all service areas, as well as understand the level of cost recovery for fee types that are usually set to recover the full cost of service. For example, most recreation programs are generally heavily subsidized, as there is a community benefit to these programs along with the individual benefit. On the other hand, fees for building permits are generally targeted at full cost recovery, as they have only individual benefit. Most departments have not undergone a fee study for over 10 years, and annual changes to fees have been limited. In the meantime, CPI has increased at a cumulative rate of 19% since 2008, and average full-time labor costs have increased by 4% per year. The Comprehensive User Fee Study allowed us to take a current look at the status of our fees and confirm that they are set at appropriate levels, and identify those that require adjustments. Knowing that any fee increases have impacts to the community, it's also recognized that a phased approach to increasing fees is generally most palatable, and changes to bring fees to their appropriate levels may occur over several years. Based on the historical CPI and labor increases over the past 10 years, a maximum 15% increase, but never more than the full cost of service, is being contemplated for this set of adjustments. Over 1,400 fees were included in the fee study, covering several service areas and operations. The results of the study show fees falling into one of three categories. About 29% of the fees were validated to be at appropriate levels and are proposed to remain unchanged. About 14% of the fees represent additions or deletions and are generally the result of aligning fee structures to current services, establishing fees for facilities, or services that were recent additions, while eliminating fees that are no longer applicable or are obsolete. The remaining fees fell into the categories that require an increase or decrease to set them to the appropriate levels. Community services is unlike other fee areas. Recreation programs are typically heavily subsidized, as there is a community benefit to these programs along with the individual benefit. Facility rental rates are based on market conditions. There are more than 600 fees in recreation. Approximately 60% of those fees are proposed to remain unchanged. 15% are increasing and 14% are being deleted or restructured to a different format, as in changing from a flat to an hourly or vice versa. Recreation is proposing 70 new fees across 4 fee categories, including fees for the new Ponderosa Family Resource Center, swimming pool rentals, parking lot rentals, and a photo permit fee at Oak Canyon Nature Center. The majority of their proposed fee increases are related to facility rentals, where rates are based on the market conditions with the largest impact on commercial usage. Library was not part of the user fee study because facility rentals are driven by market rates. However, we are proposing to move forward with their facility rental fees in parallel with the recreation facilities. For the remaining departments, fees are directly related to the cost of providing the service. The study reviewed staff time spent on each fee-related activity or service to determine the direct cost. Indirect or overhead costs were layered on top to determine the total cost of providing that service. Overall, most fee areas generate less revenue than the actual cost of providing services. Fees generally need to be increased to continue full funding, plan check, and inspection services. It's not unusual to find that costs outpace revenues over time. The police department is proposing increases to 6 of 14 fees. Almost half the fees are remaining unchanged or being reduced. The department is proposing 2 new fees for DUI vehicle release and body-worn camera recordings. Fire and rescue fees include fire plan check and inspection, false alarm, and first responder fees. 82% of the fire and rescue fees are new or increasing, while 18% are proposed to decrease, remain unchanged, or be eliminated.
Excuse me. Maybe I'm a little confused. You said that you only mentioned a couple police fees that are increasing, but is that just an example of 2 fees, or is it only 2 fees are being increased?
Those are the 2 new fees.
2 new fees. Oh, then 57% of the existing fees are being increased.
Correct.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Of the increased fees in fire, over half are extremely low volume fees. For fees collected by the city attorney and city clerk, most are set by outside agencies. The city attorney's office is proposing no changes. Most of the city clerk's fees are related to records requests. Increases are proposed for notary fees and passport applications, both of which are state and federally mandated. The city clerk's proposed fee schedule includes 2 new fees for lobbyist registration and late filing penalties. Fees for copy services have been consolidated into one comprehensive model to provide for consistency across departments. The remaining fees are related to permit, plan check, and inspection in building, planning, and public works. These fees are directly related to development activity. 10% of the building fees are decreasing to keep in line with the cost of providing service. The remaining 90% are proposed to increase. 1 new fee is proposed for plan check services. However, it's worth noting that of the increasing fees, nearly 80% are extremely low volume fees. Of the proposed fee changes in planning, 24% are decreasing, 76% are increasing. Several categories are being eliminated, and 9 fee categories are changing from a deposit to a flat fee. Some examples of the new flat fee categories include a CUP with no construction, a variance, and the recently created minor CUP. The charge to the customers will not vary significantly, but will provide better predictability. Most fees are currently charged at an hourly rate. The hourly rate is proposed to increase from $101 from $181 to $195, which is an 8% increase, but will put the hourly rate at full cost recovery. When comparing the proposed building fees of 6 common project types to the current fees of Huntington Beach, Garden Grove, Orange, Tustin, Santa Ana, and Fullerton, Anaheim fell in the middle or bottom of the comparisons in all but one category. Anaheim fell in third place for a single-family residence of 3,250 square feet. It's important to note that these comparisons were done with our proposed increases and the other cities' current fees. Therefore, we may end up comparing even more favorably in the end.
Can you, the fee hourly rate you quoted was for what? The 181 to 195?
From 181 to 195.
And that's for what? I didn't catch.
Planning hourly fees.
So that's our in-house planning charge
Correct.
for someone at the planning counter. If you have a question, essentially. Okay.
Mayor, Council, just for clarification, no, if you're at our counter, just ask a simple question, then you're likely going to fall into one of our administrative fees, which is a flat fee.
Okay.
The hourly rate is only applicable if it's a larger application where there's an hourly rate for bigger type projects.
Okay. Thank you.
Debbie, can you repeat that last set of statements regarding the comparatives?
So that these comparatives were done with our proposed increases in those cities' current fees. So at the end of the day, if they're going through the same process like we are, we may fare even more comparably.
So, but if they don't do anything to their fees and we increase some of our fees,
we still are generally in the lower part of that group.
Okay.
In Public Works, 41% of the proposed fees are decreasing or will remain unchanged. 59% of the fees are proposed to increase, and there are 2 new fees proposed for operations plan check and inspection. We conducted a survey of local Orange County cities to learn their plans for user fees. 5 local cities indicated that they were planning user fee increases. 4 additional cities are either in the process of or planning fee studies within the next year. Of those responding, many target full cost recovery. 1 city indicated that it is planning to rescind a resolution that ties annual fee increases to CPI because salary and benefit costs have increased substantially more than CPI over the last 5 years. Here's a summary of the revenue potential of increasing fees no more than 15% in fiscal year 2018-19. In no instance would the fee be more than the cost of service, and in many cases, the fees will remain far below the cost of service. The recovery percentage would increase from 60 to 67% on average citywide, and these are an annual estimate, could be lower based on the timing of implementation. So now we'll move on to development impact fees, which are one-time charges imposed on new development to recover or partially recover the estimated reasonable cost of providing public facilities needed to mitigate the impacts of new development. The goals of the study were to simplify the application of fees and to update the current fee structure, which would make it easier for staff to implement and for developers to project all costs associated with development. The proposed development impact fees would modify our current fee structure, which charges select fees only in specific geographic areas, as in police and fire fees only are applied in the Platinum Triangle. Moving forward, all development impact fees would be assessed equally across the entire city, yielding a simplified fee program that is easier to navigate for both staff and external stakeholders in the development community. The table shown here compares the current fees with the proposed fee adjustments. In some cases, current fees show a range because of multiple land types or fees in different areas of the city. We've compared the proposed development impact fees with Orange County cities and the 10 most populous cities in California. Police, fire, and library impact fees are charged only in a small portion of cities. The proposed police fees would remain flat from the existing Platinum Triangle fees, but would be applied citywide and would place Anaheim generally in line with other cities in Orange County and the state's most populous cities. Fire fees are proposed to be lower or the same as the current fees based on the maximum allowable in the study and also would place Anaheim in line with other cities in Orange County and the state. With a proposed 15% increase to library impact fees, Anaheim would remain the lowest of those cities collecting a fee in both Orange County and the state. Park impact fees are the most widely charged of the development impact fees, with a proposed 15% increase. Of the Orange County cities reviewed, Anaheim would be in the lower third of the 25 cities, more than double with the largest fees being Newport Beach and La Palma, more than double the proposed Anaheim fee. In the largest California cities, Anaheim fee would be the fourth highest behind San Jose, Los Angeles, and San Diego. Transportation fees are also widely charged. With a proposed 10% increase, Anaheim would remain near the top of Orange County cities, but is generally near the middle of the pack when comparing to the most populous cities in California. Included here are 3 sample projects to compare current fees with the proposed increases. They represent the average size of developments in each land use area based on permit data from 2013 to 2017. The first example shows a breakdown of current non-platinum triangle and current platinum triangle fees versus the proposed new fees for a 200-unit residential project on undeveloped land. Under the new model, a project of this type would be $2.7 million compared with $1.3 million. The second table compares a 100-unit hotel-motel development on undeveloped land, and the final example shows a comparison for a 55,000 square foot retail commercial development on undeveloped land. To simplify the projections, we did not include fee mitigation from fees collected on the existing land use. For example, in instances where a retail commercial project is built on a parcel that is currently developed as industrial, the project will only be assessed the difference between the new development and existing land use, reducing the total amount of fees paid. The vast majority of future development projects will fall into this category as there's not a large inventory of undeveloped land in the city. Again, the proposed fee changes are generally no more than 15% and in no case more than the full cost of providing the service. We're still evaluating and fine-tuning fees and may change slightly as we continue to receive stakeholder input. We'll publicly notice the proposed fee changes and plan to hold a public hearing with the annual budget adoption on June 19th. Additionally, we would recommend that we take 60 to 90 days to fully implement fee changes to allow time to update materials and clearly communicate these changes to the public. That concludes my presentation. My colleagues and I are happy to answer any questions you may have.
Colleagues, questions? Councilman Fessel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Debbie, for the very complete report. And again, just for those who are tuning in, we were given additional backup information and had meetings with all of you in the past. Just a few rather simple questions for me. And one of them comes to mind because I take my grandchildren there every once in a while. Photo permit fee at Oak Canyon Nature Center. I suspect that has something to do with like a wedding or something. If I have a kid, if I have Colin or something that's looking at a tree, you're not going to charge me for a snapshot, I hope, are you, Larry?
No, what that is for photographers who come to the facility for events, and then they would be there for periods of time to take photographs of the event.
Answered the question.
Okay.
Okay. But Larry, since you were up here, there is a methodology at which we arrive at a park fee. And I believe you've explained to me that it's based upon our population. It's the allowance that we have set aside for so many acres per resident versus the cost. Can you give us a reminder of how that works without getting too complex?
Yes, and you're speaking of park development fees, and
yes.
The Quimby Act, the fee is, and it's a little confusing, but I'll try to explain it. It's the cost per acre of development. It's the cost per acre of the land multiplied by the city park standard. In our city, it's 2 acres per thousand, multiplied by the population per household, and that figure in Anaheim is 3.226. So that is the arithmetic that we have always used to come up with our in lieu fee formula for developers.
And I believe if we follow that, it's something like $27,000 per unit, isn't it?
If we follow it based on the current numbers, it's about $21,000 per unit.
$21,000.
Right.
And so the Platinum Triangle number is 8114, and we're suggesting 9331 across the city.
That's right.
Okay, so we're certainly not following completely our own recommendation then, are we? And additionally, those park fees are development fees. They don't cover maintenance or upkeep or staff or anything. So they're new parkland. Do they include capital projects if we're going to build a new restroom or something like that?
Yes, by ordinance, by the Quimby law, we can't use those fees for maintenance. They can only be for new development, which would be the purchase of new land for parkland, developing that land, or enhancing existing parkland with new playgrounds, new restroom buildings, new amenities in our parks.
Mr. Mayor, I have one last question. Debbie, slide 15, if you don't mind. Okay, there's a lot of information, a lot of detail here. And I'm looking at current non-Platinum Triangle to current Platinum Triangle, and then what the difference would be proposed. So I see a representative here from the BIA, and I'm hopeful that in the discussions that you've had and the outreach, you've included individuals from our development community. So I'm looking at residential here, a 200-unit residential project built on a vacant parcel. Now, there's not much land in Anaheim we can still do those with, but certainly in the Platinum Triangle would be one of those. Even infill in existing parts of town, that would be hard to do. So I'm seeing that current non-Platinum Triangle, a developer might have a fee of about $6,700. Under the new fee schedule, it's about $13,000 per unit. Is that correct? That's how I'm reading this. And then for the whole project, it would non-Platinum Triangle would go from 1.3 million to 2.6 million, or essentially almost doubling. I'm looking at the project total under the most residential, on the far left.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
But if you're building in Platinum Triangle, where the bulk of our land would probably exist, it will decrease.
Okay, so I'm just, that is a striking change, and I'm just as a matter of fact, the 3.1 to 2.6, actually there's a decrease than in the Platinum Triangle from what I see here. Is that correct?
Yes, that's what I just indicated.
Okay, so if anything, it actually becomes a little bit more easy for the developers to provide housing there. Okay, I just want to make sure that I understood the numbers as they were presented. Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, we met before on this, and I've got big concerns generally on increasing fees, particularly greater than CPI. It seems like we've done increased fees, maybe not on every item, or many items, but over the years, it seems like there's always a fee increase. But some of these are, Councilmember Fessel just pointed out, that's a big increase in per unit construction costs. And, so one side of our city, we talk about affordable housing, and we wonder how we could get more affordable housing. Then the other side, we're talking about increasing the fees substantially on kind of across the board. And so I'm curious, if you take all the fees on our annual budget, if you put all this together how much, and Debbie, I know you look at, totals. So do you see, if we pass all this, our fees today, total fees, all these categories, is how much, and then how much would it increase to?
Well, this is going to be all for the development impact fees. This will all be for future development. So
Let me step back. So I'm getting off this page. I'm talking about just our annual, on our revenue for our city. When we get fees, right today, it's a certain amount. Let's call it maybe 5 million or 10 million or something.
yeah, we'll flip back to that. So it's going to be,
Okay.
the increase there is 1.8 million on an annual basis.
So our total, and this is what we actually, this is what's actually spent right now on fees, total. Not in theory, this is what we actually spend. People pay on fees.
Yes.
And then if we pass this, it will increase by $2 million roughly.
Yes, just under 2 million.
So we go from, trying to figure out how to read this cost of user. Current revenue 16 million to roughly 18 million
Correct.
total. Fees, our total fees will be 18 million on our revenue, on our income statement. And right now they're around 16 million. Okay. So that's about an increase of what percent? I guess we can figure that out. 2 million over 16 million. Roughly around 10% or so.
12.5%.
12.5% increase in our fees. It's a big jump. Okay. Anyway, I'm concerned. Councilmember Vanderbilt.
Well, I wasn't going to ask this initially, but let me ask now, since the screen is, this is user fees. Mr. Mayor, was your question user fees and impact fees? Because you were talking about development and impact fees.
My question was more just fees in general. That we're seeing an increase of 12% in our fees from last year, and
my question is: 12% user fees or 12% both user fee and impact fees?
These are just user fees. The development impact fees, we wouldn't see the effects of that for some time down the line because folks are already under agreement and have permits and such. So that's an unknown at this point, but it would be sometime in the future.
Okay, so if I can, let me continue.
see more maybe. Go ahead.
So my line of questioning does want to zero in on the impact fees and also the fee deferral program. So let me start by asking this question. Hopefully it makes sense. In the fee deferral program, the fees are paid at the tail end of the development. So as I read here on the website, fees are deferred until the development is ready for final inspection, a temporary or final certificate of occupancy. So my first question is, if there is a fee change, are these fees already in the pipeline? Have you already calculated them up front? And does the developer say, well, I realize if the fees went into effect July 1st and I've already started the process, are my fees going to jump up because I'm in this fee deferral program, or will I be able to pay the original fees? So are the fees calculated for all the development that is in the pipeline and would be eligible for this deferral program?
Mayor and Council, the building impact fees are calculated and assessed at the issuance of building permit. So if I'm out there planning, unless I have the protection of a development agreement, if I don't have the protection of a development agreement, I'm out there now contemplating my project, and I go through that entitlement process through the Planning Commission, and it may take me a year or so to complete the building plan check process, and I get ready to come in and say, I'd like my building permit. At that point in time, the impact fees are assessed. And under that fee deferral program, they're assessed from that point in time to final certificate of occupancy, which on larger projects is potentially a year, year and a half. So I hope that answers your question. So they are calculated and assessed when I'm seeking my building permit.
Okay, so, well, what I guess I'd like to ask, and I think I've had a few conversations with you, Mr. Belmer, on this, is the city is unique. Unlike other cities, they don't have a deferral program. The fees are paid earlier, are they not?
I beg your pardon, I'm not sure I heard you. Did you say do other cities, are you asking if other cities have a fee deferral program?
Right.
I believe so. It exists. I don't know if they're quite as aggressive as we are in deferring all of our impact fees for as long as we do. The program was instituted during the recession for the obvious reasons. We were trying to, incentivize development. I will tell you at the staff level, we have discussed, is it time to revisit that? At this point in time, we're choosing to focus our attention on what the fee is for the obvious reasons that they're not capturing our cost of our capital needs. We've debated various scenarios there, to one of them being perhaps we should only defer 50% of the fees, or we should only defer certain categories of fees. An example would be our parks fee. We know it's a priority here in the city of Anaheim. We're in need of improving our parks and building new parks. So one thought was defer all fees but park fees. But as we sit here now, all those fees except the fire impact fee is eligible to be deferred under that program. And we don't defer the fire fee because those fire services are required at the time construction begins. In fact, arguably, sometimes fires occur more often when construction is underway, so we don't defer the fire fee. But all the other fees that were shown on that slide, police, library, traffic, parks, are eligible for that fee deferral.
Okay, well, and I don't know if you can answer this question at this time, but maybe at a later date, is there perhaps some combination of removing the deferral program and postponing the fee increase, the impact fees, so that you can achieve more revenue sooner without a genuine increase for the developer. So the developer, and perhaps you postpone the increase, but you move up the developer fee due date. And in doing both of those, perhaps you increase the stream of revenue to the city without hitting the developer, at least in the impact fee arena, as opposed to, the user fees I think is a separate conversation.
We could certainly look at that. It might be a little complicated, I think, only in that we certainly know what our cost of money is. It's easier for the city to assess our cost in deferring those fees because we know what we'd be receiving an investment if we have those funds in our account. I think on the developer community, it's a little bit more of a variable. It's dependent on their cost of borrowing money. Those rates are generally known. I'm not sure how that would equate, honestly, what they'd have to be with that. For example, if we were to try to translate some sort of acceleration in the fee deferral to a reduction in that impact fee, would that need to be a 5% reduction, a 10%? I'm not sure. We'd have to look at that. I know also, though, developers seek certainty. And so we hear that regularly from the development community. I'd almost rather know what your fee is and tell me up front. And I'll find a way to pay it. And certainly the data so far suggests our development impact fees are certainly not out of whack with the market, even as adjusted.
Councilmember Fessel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Belmer, you just touched on something that I'd like to have you explore a little bit more, that I think Debbie discussed, that I think our fees have to be fair, and our development community needs to know what they are going in. I've been told by the development community that time is money, and I have been led to understand, especially going back to my days as a planning commissioner, that development can usually be passed through the Anaheim system fairly readily, fairly quickly. But I'm wondering how, let's explore a little bit more where is Anaheim with regards to our surrounding communities. I know Debbie mentioned that we would be in the sort of the middle of the road sort of the middle of the stack. Do we have actually a slide or something that you could show us that? Or because you related the other cities rather rapidly, and I think it's important for me to see where we end up, certainly so the development community can feel that we're not, I'd be more comfortable if we were somewhere in the middle than being at the very, very high end. Now, that may require us to recover some fees, because fee recovery is what we're here for tonight. And if I think we're using the term, not rebate, but what's the term that we're using? The difference between our cost and the recovery is the subsidy, exactly. So we're trying to minimize that and ask our developers to, whether it's an individual building one home or a large developer building 200, we're trying to equitably recover our cost. Okay, so thank you.
Council, maybe I could walk you through this really quickly.
Thank you, please.
First of all, these are not impact fees. These are building permit fees.
I understand.
These are building permit fees. But to your point, Councilmember Fessel, where do we stack up with our neighbors when developers come in and say, I'm seeking a building permit for a project of some sort? These tend to be the smaller projects, but that's in some way our bread and butter. That's a large measure of what we do on a day-to-day basis. So we looked at, as you know, we have a number of building permit categories. It would be difficult for us to provide examples of hundreds of those. So we pulled out 6 representative samples of what we do on a regular basis. The first one is an assembly building. That's a commercial building, 3,500 square foot addition. It's got a project valuation of $1.1 million. And what you see there are the fees, and you can see we're near the bottom. So there's only one city below us. So they range from $3,900 all the way up to almost $14,000. And for clarification, that fee, that $4,700 fee, is both the building permit fee and the plan check fee. So that's your fee. Moving over now, we're into the residential category. So we wanted to show you, okay, if you're building a single family home of 3,200 square feet, project valuation of approximately $700,000. You can see now we're tending a little bit towards the higher end, granted, but it ranges from $2,500 all the way up to almost $10,000. Next one is a commercial application, a storage building, total valuation of $450,000. We're tending back towards the middle. If you advance to the next slide, you'll see now here we're tending back towards the bottom. And I would like to point out the one on the extreme right, because I know the council has asked us questions about how would this impact single-family residential homeowners that are seeking to improve their homes. This is an example of that. Small addition to your home, under 500 square feet. Your total fee for plan check and inspection would be $1,600. As you can see, we're right in the middle.
And these numbers that you've shown us associated with Anaheim reflect our new fee schedule as we're being reviewed tonight.
Yes, exactly.
For me, this makes me feel better. I hope this makes the development community feel better as well. Now, again, we're not looking at impact fees. Right. We're looking at our regular fee schedule. Yes. So this would include building and plan check. Okay. Do we have a similar, I think I'm going to ask the question all of us are wondering, do we have a similar scenario here for impact fees?
I think we do.
And if staff is getting to that slide, I want to add as well, Ms. Moreno did report in her presentation that there are a number of Orange County cities that are reviewing their fees at this point in time. So these are the numbers as they stand today. On that previous slide, we saw the city of Orange. In one case, they were below us. In another case, they were higher than us. And there are a few cities, at least 5, that are looking at full cost recovery. City of Seal Beach, as Ms. Moreno indicated, is actually looking at rescinding a resolution to not tie their annual fee schedule into CPI.
Mr. Belmer, I think it looks like staff has pulled these up. Could you give us a very, very quick walkthrough for these, if that's possible? Or Ms. Moreno, maybe you
But I would probably mess it up, so I'm going to defer to Debbie because she's more the expert on this.
Okay.
So as I mentioned in the presentation, the most common fee, most widely charged impact fee are going to be the park impact fees. So if you look here on this slide, you'll see with our proposed 15% increase, we are really in the middle of that pack. So you see a number of folks above us, Newport Beach, La Palma, at more than twice us, all the way down to Westminster being the lowest at 870.
And library impact fee, as I see, even with our increase, we're very, very modest, although not all other cities have this fee then.
That's correct.
So even if you were going to add the library fee on top of the park impact fee, we're still on the bottom 30th percentile then, I would think, or 40th percentile perhaps.
Correct.
Okay. And are there others?
Go to the transportation.
I think it's important for all of us to see, even, you know, and the mayor, I take the mayor's statement very, very much to heart that these seem to be significant increases, but they still put us more or less in the middle of the pack, and we derive additional income, which can be spent for a lot of other things that we need here in Anaheim. I'm a little bit more open-minded to this.
So
Okay.
here again is another more widely charged impact fee for transportation. So our fees were slightly more than middle of the pack already. So this is why the recommendation is to be a 10% increase rather than 15%.
And is there,
And then if you go back to
or is that it?
So police impact, fire impact fees, not as widely charged, but still typically we're not at the top.
And again, the numbers highlighted in yellow are based upon the proposal. And of course, as the city manager has told us, the other ones reflect current conditions in those cities which may or may not be considering doing the same thing that we're looking at here. Okay, so understood. Okay, Ms. Moreno, was that, I think that's probably it. Okay, thank you very much. And I hope that this adds some perspective for all of us here that while we're talking about some significant increases, maybe taken as a whole and looking at the whole, you know, our adjoining or adjacent cities, we're not, maybe we're just catching up where we should have been some time ago. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
And if I could add one little note as this slide is up there too, we are sensitive to adjusting our fees while remaining sensitive to making sure that we sustain what we're able to do here. We are not recommending any changes to the slide before you here with police and fire.
So the, just a clarification, when it says residential, was that per residential unit on mixed multifamily or single family, or what's, everything else seems to be defined a little further per room, per square foot?
Yes, it is per unit.
Per unit for single family, and multifamily is the same?
Correct. Well, per unit.
Per unit. So single family, one single family house would be the same as a one unit in an apartment?
Correct.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem.
So thank you for the prep meetings. They were helpful with a lot of detail, and this PowerPoint is even more helpful because it helps summarize a lot of that information. So I'm still trying to digest some of the comparisons because that's some of the questions that I had in our briefing meeting. So for the average resident, they tend to ask, well, isn't this why I pay taxes? Why am I being charged fees? Isn't this what our taxes are supposed to pay? What's the simplest, most clear answer that we could say to our residents when they say, well, isn't this why we already pay taxes? So why should I have to pay extra to take a picture or have my photographer take a picture of me for my wedding at the park? Isn't that why we pay taxes?
Well, there are going to be services that we all would expect everyone gets equally, such as fire, police protection. But there are going to be then those things that we opt to. We have a choice about whether we take those services, such as weddings and things like that. And they're still going to be subsidized. But because there is some individual benefit to that, those aren't necessarily going to come from taxes. The taxes will only go so far.
Thank you. That's very helpful. So someone chooses to enhance their quality of life in some way, or chooses to try to improve their business, or chooses to expand their home, then you got to pay a little extra.
Correct. And to the extent, though, that choice has more of a community benefit, such as a recreation program, or youth have somewhere to go and be productive with their time, those are going to be much more heavily subsidized than such as a building fee, which is something that somebody chooses to do and really has more of an individual benefit than a community benefit.
So can you go to the slide? Thank you. So can you go to the slide that shows the recoveries, the percentages, the subsidies? I guess that since subsidy is a very has become a very well-known term now in our city, that comes with it a lot of different understandings. So currently, if I'm reading this right, the cost of services, let's say for police, is $2.1 million. What would be the kind of choices that folks are making that require an extra fee from the police?
Most of those are going to be more records type requests and information that they choose to obtain.
Okay. And so presumably then that goes to enhance civilian services, resident services, when they need things beyond an officer showing up to their house. They then need to get their car out of the towing company, or to get records to go defend themselves in court. They would have to then get those records from the police department, which then is a fee?
Correct.
Okay. And so our current revenue for the use of those fees is $1.4 million. So we are subsidizing residents by $700,000 for obtaining records, for obtaining other extra things that they may need.
Yeah, and it's because, it's an average of those different fees. And so there'll be some fees that are determined to be more of a benefit to subsidize or offset than others.
Okay. And it appears that the two largest areas that we subsidize are residents in terms of kind of choice fees, I guess I'll think of them that way, is fire and rescue, right? $5.75 million. What is it that we're subsidizing exactly? Is there a huge chunk, or is it spread out through a whole bunch of little services?
If you give me 1 minute, let me get back to the detail here. But I believe those.
And then I'll ask the same thing around building, because I'm looking at the top 2 or 3. Building, we subsidize at $2.5 million. But it seems like that fire and rescue, we only recover 23% of the actual cost of this fee, right, of the service.
So the largest subsidies are going to be for paramedic services, and then for certain inspections where you don't want to be the cost to be so burdensome that folks won't undertake those, because now that is a benefit to the community that they have those inspections then as well for safety.
And that's both residential and commercial inspections?
Let me ask this question while you're asking that. And I think I know the answer, but you don't. Your definition of public and private use had to do with choosing to benefit. And if you have a building, I don't think you have any choice whether you get a fire inspection or not. I don't think. But anyway, I'll kind of throw that in. Maybe you answer that question as you answer the other. Chief.
But your choice is to have a business, but that's why they're still subsidized in some of those instances on inspections, because there is the community benefit of you having those inspections done.
Okay. So overall, on this chart, we're currently recovering 60% of the actual cost of the service. We're only recovering 60 cents on the dollar. So who's paying for that subsidy? So that 40 cents that is being subsidized,
That would be,
where does that come from?
that would come from unrestricted tax revenue that could be used for any other purpose. So to the extent we recovered costs for services, those tax dollars then could be redirected for other additional services potentially.
So to actually hire folks to maintain the park, to hire folks to produce the records, hire folks to be paramedics, right? So we're pulling out of the general fund to subsidize and keep these fees low?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. So the proposal then is to phase in, presumably, because to do it all at once, to do full recovery would be untenable, right, for residents as well as for business who is interested in developing in our city. So the proposed increases would recover our cost to 67%. So we would still be subsidizing these services at about 33 cents on the dollar?
Yes, and there would be areas, especially when you're looking at recreation and such, which, and this is excluding that, but there would still be areas that we would recommend that there still be a continued subsidy of some level.
And again, that subsidy comes from the general fund,
Correct.
right? And so these fees don't go to hire staff. Do they go to hire staff or personnel so that things can be streamlined, so that records are produced more efficiently for folks who need them, or for paramedics to be able to service the city better? Or I guess I'm
3/4 of our costs in the general fund are going to be for labor and benefits.
right.
So these user fees are primarily based on the cost, the employees' costs to provide the service. So to the extent that we increase our user fees to cover that cost of service, there would be less required of the tax dollars that could be used for anything.
Oh, okay.
Where these user fees can only be used to provide these services.
Okay. So the purpose of these fees isn't to grow government, it's to make government more efficient, because we'll be able to use our general tax dollars for those things that are either mandated or that are absolute necessities for quality of life. Is that fair to say?
It allows us more choices with our discretionary tax revenue.
Okay. Last question, Mr. Mayor, that I have is what I would find helpful is, especially in the comparatives, is to the extent to which is something we hear a lot around development impact fees or the raising of fees, is especially around investments in our city, is these cities that have higher fees, how do we compare to them in relation to building permits, into actual construction of residences or commercial investments? Is there any data that might guide us in that effort? Like, what's the elasticity of that fee that at what point? It seems like for many in the development community, the moment you mention any kind of increase, they're like, it's over. No one's going to come and invest here. So there's a tipping point, presumably, a price elasticity to what they'll tolerate, and presumably comparatives to other cities. We won't be threatened with, you know what, then we're going to go build in Huntington Beach, because it looks like Huntington Beach is just like ridiculously expensive to do any business in, but yet they still get business to develop there. So, Mr. Bell, maybe you could help on that?
Well, Mayor and Council, sure, and I know the Council knows this, that issue is frequently and vigorously debated. So I would answer the question this way. I know for a fact that there is development occurring in the city of Huntington Beach. There is development occurring there. Now, are the fees, are those fee levels somehow causing less development to occur there than otherwise might be occurring there? Oh, I don't know. We'd have to probably commission some sort of scientific analysis to do that. Our approach has been, well, does it pass the basic test of what's logical and reasonable? And quite frankly, given the fact that we have fallen behind, how do we start to catch up? And can we catch up all at one time? I think we felt like probably not, arguably. We need to chart a course now for an incremental, strategic incrementalism, as they call it. So we're going to start to move towards full cost recovery. How we get there is ultimately for the council to decide. In our opinion, a 15% adjustment at this point in time seemed like reasonable and logical and sustainable in the development community, certainly, given where we'd fall relative to other cities. It would be difficult for someone to make the argument in Anaheim that our fee structure is going to disincentivize development.
Okay. And when we defer, this last question, when we defer the park fees, those are presumably to build up amenities for residents, maybe to attract them to buy those condominiums or townhomes or to rent, right? So when someone moves in, the amenities get built after they move in or after there's been units sold, or Larry?
Well, yeah, that is correct. Because the park fees are not paid to the city until the certificate of occupancy. We then, while we can plan for some of the amenities, plan for some of the parks or target areas that we want to improve, we will not be able to expend those resources until those fees are paid to benefit that specific development around the sphere of influence of that development.
Which postpones the amenities for about a year or two at least?
I'm sorry, the question again?
So it postpones the ability to have these amenities for that neighborhood that was built out for a year or two before they can have amenities in their local area?
It could, certainly. If it's a large project, I mean, from the time you begin the planning process and permits and construction documents, yeah, it could be up to a year or even more. It just depends on the size of the improvement.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think I'm concerned, I mentioned earlier, I'm concerned about the fees increasing so much. If a CPI, I think, is reasonable, but some of these fee increases, I disagree with the statement that fee increases don't disincentive development. I think any increase in cost disincentivizes development, whether it makes it not happen or not. But I think in the aggregate, it does serve as a disincentive. And again, we're talking about I'm very concerned about fees across the board, because I agree with Mayor Pro Tem's statement. I think a lot of people think that this is what they pay their taxes for. And as things get tighter and tighter, of course, the pressure moves. We have to increase fees to pay for existing services. So with that, I'm going to conclude the workshop and move to closed session agenda. Madam Clerk, are there any additions or deletions to the closed session agenda?
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, because City Manager started the meeting asking that one of the goals is to have some direction. So I'm wondering if staff feels that they have some direction around the items before us.
Direction would be great, because our plan is, following this workshop, is to present our recommendation to council during budget adoption last meeting in June. If we receive direction, we can go back and review the study further. And Mr. Mayor, I hear you loud and clear regarding CPI. Ms. Moreno presented the cumulative of CPI over the last few years is 19%. So we felt it would be reasonable to bring that down to 15%. So we're not even recommending an increase that would meet the cumulative 19%. If we don't adjust fees here, we need to explore another avenue.
So let me ask this. So maybe I'm mistaken. So any fee increase, let's say if we have an increase, if we increased a fee, if it's just been 1 year since an increase, we're not increasing it more than 2 or 3%. But if it's maybe hasn't been increased in 10 years, then the CPI over the 10 years, it might be more like 20%, that fee. So we're not doing any more than CPI increase?
That is generally correct.
Generally correct?
Yes.
Can we make it?
I mean, there's one department that had a few more fee increases in there, but if you look at it globally, we're doing less than the CPI has been over the last 10 years.
So if I could get me a list of the ones that aren't in that general category that increase more than CPI, and then if I get a list and any new fees that we didn't have before.
Okay.
Thanks. You get any other questions or comments?
So if I could ask, it seems that if there's no objection from council, that generally this is a direction that folks are comfortable with. I'm comfortable with what you just said, Mr. Mayor, to look at it from that perspective, and I think that's what's pretty much captured. So I'm comfortable with the direction staff has recommended.
Yeah. So I don't say I'm comfortable, but I'm agreeable to CPI increase. on individual fees. And maybe, I'm not sure if I'm interested in any brand new fees altogether. So I'll have to study that. I'm going to have to contemplate that one.
Okay.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, just for clarification, most of the new fees really are for new programs or facilities. So just so you're aware of that, but we'd be happy to get you that list.
I mean, the one, for somebody to get a recording, a police recording, charging a fee for that, I don't know if that's something, for example, it seems reasonable, but all right. Councilman Vanderbilt.
I did want to ask, again, I did mention earlier the question about the deferral fee, and I was wondering if staff could at least explore that a little further, since you had been having conversations. It seems like maybe this is the juncture where it would be worthwhile including with this discussion, especially if there's some combination where maybe you can make some adjustments in both the impact fee increases and the deferment program that might lessen the blow to developers. I think that's worth exploring and talking about. Thank you.
So the way I articulated, does that seem like we're on the same page, Councilmember Kring?
And same with the direction that Councilmember Vanderbilt just requested as well, right?
Take a look at that. Okay. All right. So now at this time, Madam Clerk, are there any additions or deletions to the closed session agenda?
There are none.
Okay. Now is the time for public comments. Are there members of the public who wish to be heard on the closed session agenda?
Taxpayers pay, and they'll be taking probably an hour off, and the meeting really won't start till 5:30 because of the discourtesy of the 7 members of this city council, and that's pretty disgusting. Okay, on the closed session, there's no information at all that you ever gave up on this Anaheim Planning Arts Center Foundation, which means that there's something wrong, something fishy, and it looks like another giveaway to Disney, all right? A year ago, that doctor in Anaheim Hills had a kind of a scam going on. What it was is he was going to obtain the Grove Theater from the city of Anaheim under the guise of a charity. And as I understand, if I remember correctly, his charity was called Anaheim Performing Arts Center Foundation. And the way it worked, he was going to get the land of the foundation, which happened to be right next to the train station that Disney has their eye on, that has been closed for no reason at all, and $200 million wasted on a new train station, which is useless. But the deal was, as I remember a year ago, all this doctor from Anaheim Hill has to do was produce $50 million worth of donations, and the Grove Theater would become his property or his foundation property, and he would be able to then sell the property, the Grove Theater, to Disneyland for whatever property and whatever, for a very low price. Now, the thing was, and then it was changed. He didn't have to raise $50 million. All he had to do was get pledges for the $50 million for his foundation, which meant he could go to maybe one of the parks where the homeless people are and have them sign $2-3 million pledges, and then that would be a $50 million worth of pledge, and he would get the land over to his charity, and from there he could sell it to Disney and do whatever with the extra money for his charity, make himself the director at a very high pay or whatever. As I remember, the only person on the council at that time spoke was Mayor Tom Tate, and he said something about, hey, this isn't right. They can give pledges instead of raising the money at all. That's a fraud. And it looks like Disney, once again, is getting away with a scheme to get a hold of some property to give away from the people of Anaheim.
Would anyone else like to be heard on a closed session, on the closed session agenda? See none, we'll recess to closed session. I know.